the Redcap platform from Irma Murray, as well as two individuals who've been using Redcap in their work, Catherine Johnston and Rose Bandini. And then secondly, we'll be hearing from Thomas Chapman of BINU, who provides a set of platforms to allow for data-free engagement with research participants. And we'll also be hearing from a user of these platforms, Dr. Benjamin Roberts at the HSRC. So I would really like colleagues to please feel free to raise questions, thoughts, suggestions. The chat window is always open for you to communicate any thoughts as the presentations go along. And it'll also be great if people can raise hands if they'd like to speak directly to our presenters. I also just want to give a quick note before we start in terms of upcoming seminars. So obviously the seminar on the 24th of September, we will just skip it, given that it falls on a public holiday. So our next seminar will only be on the 8th of October, and we're looking at having a strong M&E focus there. And I think that's going to be a really fascinating one. And then we are looking at wrapping up the series for the moment on the 22nd of October with a focus on what various large-scale research projects are doing to adapt to the context of COVID. So with that introductory note, I think I'm going to hand over to Irma. Irma, all yours.
Thank you so much, Julia, for the invitation, and good morning to everybody. I'm Irma. I'm going to switch on my camera just to say hi briefly. So thank you so much for having me. I am responsible for running Redcap at Wits University. So we've got a small group called the Biomedical Informatics Division. We started using this product called Redcap about 8 years ago in 2012. And it's grown to over 6,000 user accounts from all of our research units and allied research staff members. So it's seen very enthusiastic uptake in our environment. And I thought I'd just share a little bit around how Redcap really, allowed us to respond very quickly to conducting research remotely. Especially what became incredibly important in the last few months was the survey functionality in Redcap. So we often refer to Redcap as SurveyMonkey on steroids. So I'm going to screen share with you. Let's see. All right. So the tool called Redcap is really there to allow users to build their own electronic data collection instruments, much like SurveyMonkey or Google Forms or Microsoft Forms. The interface to build those tools are very similar, but Redcap is geared towards clinical research, so it has a lot of extra functionality built in for research purposes, as well as to make your research compliant with HIPAA. So one of the big problems that Vanderbilt University, who created Redcap, encountered is the same as all of us know. Researchers kept, their data in Excel sheets on their own computers or on their local devices or whatever the case may be. So Paul Harris, around about 2004, Paul Harris, who invented Redcap, decided he's going to build a tool that allows, normal end users, and I say normal here as in people with no particular IT skills, to just build their own data collection tools, to be able to store their data in a compliant and secure way. And ever since, Redcap has just been expanding its functionality in various ways. And one of the big developments was the ability to not just build a data collection instrument, but to also turn it into a survey form. So what I'm going to show you today is, this is just a demo project, and it consists of 4 different instruments, 3 of which are surveys. And it is also a longitudinal project, meaning that one of the surveys can be done repeatedly. So it's set up so that, in this case, we've defined different events. So we have an initial event and then 4 weeks of follow-up. And if we look at the map between our instruments and our events, you can see that there's a screening, a sort of a once-off participant information, which I've combined with the e-consent form, because e-consent has also, become incredibly important in our setting. And then the 4 weeks of follow-up. So we do a little participant morale questionnaire at initial data once a person has passed screening, and then weekly after that. So I'm going to show you how one would, how a participant might interact with this instrument. So you would start this process either by inviting somebody. So if you have a list of patients, or some other form of knowing who your audience is ahead of time, you can use a participant list. You can load email addresses and send them survey invitations. But you also have the public survey link. So instead of, by invitation only, you can post your public link somewhere, or you can even print it out as a QR code. So if you, for example, this project has a question about diabetes. So for example, you could print out a poster with this QR code on and stick it up in a diabetes clinic, and potential candidates could, scan that with their phone and then do your screening tool. So various ways to start this encounter. So I'm going to show you what it would look like if somebody was to follow that public survey link. So we would start with a consenting question, and if people would say I do not consent, then it could end the survey right there. Or you could say, whoops, I clicked the wrong button, I want to undo that. And then you say I consent. Can enter a date of birth. So I'm going to start by entering today's date, which means my participant is too young to actually participate in this study. And you'll see that if that happens, it terminates the process as well. Thank you for your interest, but you're not eligible to participate in some point. So I'm able to build in logic in between my different instruments. So if I was to relaunch the survey and then put in, let's say that, and I'm going to put in my email address and true, submit that, it will take me to the next screen because I am now actually eligible. There, I can fill in this next form. All right. You can also, of course, with Redcap, you can have things like calculated fields in there. And because I've enabled this form as an e-consent form, I can also add a signature. Right. So the e-consent framework allows you to save a PDF snapshot of what you have signed, and you can certify that it's correct. Submit, and then it will take me to the actual questionnaire, and this is the part that will get repeated every week. So you'll see that the initial process is fairly seamless. It's 3 different instruments, but they actually, from the perspective of the person filling it in, it's all one process. All right, so that's the first event, and now the neat thing with Redcap is I've got this participant moral questionnaire that I want to repeat, and I can set that up to go out automatically. So I have these automated invites that can be set up. For example, here I've said that if pre-screening is done and the participant has consented, this logic is actually wrong. I would need to change that. There we go. Then I can set it so that it sends out this week 1 invitation exactly 7 days after the initial one has been completed, as well as enable reminders for that. So that means, I don't physically have to, for each individual participant, go and send them an email every week to remind them to fill in my questionnaire. That can all be triggered automatically. Now there are various, sort of clever tips and tricks that you can build in to make your life easier with this type of work, but the level of automation, it makes it very, very easy to do this. And obviously with COVID, it's really sort of put this type of functionality of Redcap in the spotlight for a lot of people. So the only other thing I would like to mention about this is that if you reach a certain level of usage, you might want to be careful around sending out email invitations. We've actually encountered that problem this year, partly, just because of normal growth, but also because so many more people are using surveys, in that the sort of international email exchanges don't appreciate if you dump thousands of survey invites, into the network all at once, and you will get blocklisted. So if you're planning to do this type of campaign and you are doing it via invitation, I would recommend that you either load your participants, say 1,000 at a time, and send those invites, and then schedule the next 1,000 for about an hour or so later. Or alternatively, and this is the route that we are following at the moment, is you need to sign up for some sort of bulk email provider, like SendGrid or Mandrill or something else. Now Redcap has integrations for those 2 products. That's why I mentioned them, because I know about them. But there are obviously others, and those allow you to send larger volumes of emails without being blocked as a spam or phishing scam. So that's basically what I wanted to contribute from my side. Let's see if there are any questions. Lebo, does Redcap work on cell phones and tablets? We've had some trouble with participants viewing the forms on some devices. Oh, right. So Redcap does work on mobile devices. It is responsive. So, if you have a small screen, you can see that it does adapt to the size of the screen. That being said, that if you expect people to fill it in on mobile devices, and I think, we can be fairly certain that a large percentage of people responding to a survey invite will be doing it on a phone. There are recommendations about how you design your forms. So, for example, my forms in this example is not so good for phones, but just by changing your alignment to left vertical, you immediately reduce the width of the screen by sort of putting things closer together and making it more compact. There are other sort of nuances to it that you can do to make it easier to consume on a small screen, but we generally don't have too many issues with that. Sure, Julia, Lebo, I just wanted to check, does that help? I mean, screen size is to my mind the limiting factor for survey respondents. But if you're talking about other research projects, things like like bandwidth. If you're uploading images, for example, or your forms are very long, or you have very intricate data quality rules that execute in real time, those are all things that can slow your mobile instruments down quite a bit. So I'm happy to take the conversation offline and maybe look if you're having a specific problem with that. But usually I have to say using Redcap on a mobile device hasn't given me any problems. But I'm of course fortunate in that, the areas I work in usually has good network coverage. So that might be another consideration.
That helps. I'll look into that. Thanks.
All right. Julia, you said interested in understanding where your users typically source the email addresses from. Right, so that's a good question. So most of the very big campaigns are internal. So that would be research conducted on staff and students. And then, they have address lists that are, we had it earlier this month where, they wanted to send 40,000 emails. And when they said that to the email service providers, they giggled at them because if you dump 40,000 emails out on the net, that's grounds for immediate blocklisting. So that's one example. Another example would be, for example, a student did research amongst physiotherapists a couple of years ago, and they would approach the Physiotherapy Society of South Africa for a list of their members. Now, in general, they don't like giving out those address lists. It really depends on the society and their arrangement with their members around sharing of information. But what we've had in some cases as well is where they would be willing to share the address list with me as the administrator, but not with the end user. So, the service provider actually gives me the list of addresses. I load it up and trigger the emails, but the researcher themselves don't have access to it. So it depends on where they get the addresses from. There are a couple of different routes that I've seen people follow, but in general, people are pretty careful about supplying us with bulk lists of people's contact information. So most of the bulk campaigns have actually been internal. That's a good question. Okay, Julia, you had another question from a participant, the requirements to sign up for Redcap and what costs. So the software itself is free. It's freeware, but you have to host it yourself. So your organization needs to sign up for a free license from Vanderbilt University, and then you need to, get your own server infrastructure and own support staff in place to get it up and running. So we always say it's free like a puppy, not free like a beer, because a beer is free, you drink it and it's done, but a puppy you need to feed and look after. So that's a lot like Redcap. And the other limitation is also just that you're not allowed to use Redcap for commercial purposes or commercialize the use of Redcap. It's fine if you're some kind of research organization or a healthcare or some kind of NGO type organization. Governments also qualify for licenses. Various governments around the world use Redcap. There are actually more than 4,000 different institutions worldwide using Redcap and over 1 million users. So it's very, it's a very popular and well received system. Tara, can Redcap integrate with a system that sends links and messages? Yes. So it does integrate with Twilio. In fact, they do not integrate with WhatsApp, and I don't think they will in future. And the reason for that is that WhatsApp's privacy policy is not sufficient to make it a HIPAA compliant platform. Whereas, the relationship with Twilio, Twilio's policies is that they do not store the data that gets transmitted across their systems. And Redcap just, because a lot of the work on here is highly personal and highly confidential medical information, you know, people's HIV statuses and their contact information. Redcap just said they're not willing to integrate with any platforms where there's not a very clear and strict privacy standard in place. But we have used the Twilio integration before. People are starting to, you know, really pick up on that again this year. And one of the really cool things that I like about that integration, Tara, is that you can conduct your surveys via SMS as well, meaning that you don't just send the link via SMS. You can actually send the questions and receive answers via SMS. Obviously, you need to pay for that because you would need to get a Twilio account, buy credits from them, and then, you know, those credits gets used for each SMS that gets sent. But for a lot of groups, you know, that's turned out to be a very viable and popular way of doing things. All right. Julia would also be able to understand what kind of support is available to system users. Right, so the support system there's an international forum of administrators, and that's basically a group of, you know, each institution that has Redcap has a person who supports it. And it's those support people that have a support network for administrators. And so, you know, because Redcap is not a paid for system, there's no sort of SLA or particular end user support available via Vanderbilt, but there is a very healthy sort of community support network. And if you report a bug in the software, you know, Vanderbilt does fix that because if it affects their users as well. So I've always found it to be incredibly helpful and enabling and useful. As for training, there aren't any official training courses, but there is a free Coursera course that does touch on Redcap that you can use. We've also, you know, launched training courses internally at Wits University, which people sometimes attend from other organizations. So anybody is welcome. I mean, it's not limited to just us, but we basically started those training courses just for our internal users. So it's not like you're going to walk away with some kind of official Redcap qualification, but the courses are, you know, they're really nice. They're practical courses. We have a one, well, it's not a one day anymore because we've moved all of them online. I guess that's probably one of the next questions is how did we adapt our training to COVID-19? And the answer is Zoom. We moved everything online. So we have training, and there are various sort of videos out there on YouTube and so forth about, you know, people showing all various Redcap stuff. And then if you are a Redcap administrator, there are also centralized resources available to you via the consortium. And that's just sort of stuff that people in the consortium have built and shared with each other. So it's a very lively and enabling community as well. Kaiten, can it be integrated with Google Maps? Yes, it can. We're actually in the process of doing it as well. So there's a little external module that somebody at Vanderbilt built. And if you have a Google Maps account, you know, you should have an API key, which you can enter into that module, and then you have that address list autocomplete function, because that's something we've really been struggling with. That's a good question. You know, people enter their addresses in all kinds of ways, and then we haven't found a way to actually clean that up automatically. Somebody has to afterwards go and you know, manually actually look at the address and try and find the GPS coordinates and so on. So yes, that module is really useful. Can the system be used on devices offline? There is a companion app for Redcap, which works offline. So it's basically just reproduces your instruments and offers them on a mobile app, which you can collect, store, and then synchronize at a later stage. So the app doesn't work on its own. It still needs the full version of Redcap to synchronize to. But that's been very useful in cases where you know ahead of time you're going out into the field without any internet connection. But the offline app, there are a few caveats, because it's a complicated system, and keeping it synchronized, between different devices is challenging, especially when people make changes to the project design and there's unsynchronized data sitting on devices, etc. So it can be used very successfully, but you have to be, there are some rules and SOPs to follow if you want to make that work. Tara, more specifically, quality control. I mean, back-end information, like how long does it take to answer questions? So there's an audit trail. So if I hope this is what I understood your question correctly, but here, for example, I can see the response number 7. I can see when it was saved. If you can also build in a little hidden field that will capture the time when the person loads the email, the survey up. So if you use that as together with the submission time, you can work out how long it took them to fill it in. So I've seen people do that. Yeah, so this is a sort of a project-based audit trail, but the system as a whole also has a detailed audit trail that you can draw on. And there are lots of quality control sort of measures in place. Too many to go to in here on here actually, but really that's the neat thing about Redcap, is all of the quality control that you can build in. I'm sorry, did somebody, I think I heard a question.
No, it's fine. I was just specifying this is Tara, but you've covered what I wanted to ask. Thank you.
Okay, great. Kaiten, does the system allow geofencing? I don't know, to be honest. I guess it would depend on what you're trying to. I'm not familiar enough with this technology to know if you can do what you're describing here, geofencing, or a way to add bounding boxes for various polygons. So I'm assuming that means you want to limit the geographical area where people are responding from. So I don't know enough about that technology to answer you truthfully, but I think that's likely something you could do, because you can basically set up your server to only accept responses from a certain IP range or something like that. I don't know if that will do what you're describing there. Twilio, that would be, I'm just going to put it in the message box. Twilio. By the way, Twilio is also the company responsible for SendGrid, which is the one we're using for the bulk emails. Now, just a warning, they don't allow you to sign up for sending masses of emails immediately. You have to go through a 30-day sort of period where they check you out and make sure that you're not a spammer or a phishing scam or something. So if you have to do something urgently, you might have to explore other options. But of course, it's good because it means they preserve their own sort of reputation. Because if Twilio allowed people to just pay for masses of emails and get away with anything, then obviously their reputation would go down, and then legitimate emails would also be blocked. So it's really a fascinating thing, mass email. I learned a lot more about it in the last 2 months than I ever wanted to know. Julia, presumably one could still share links via WhatsApp messages without full integration. Yes, you can. Yes, there's nothing stopping you from doing that. Is there a cap on the number of people per organization that can register to use the software? No, there's not. Oh, Catherine, thank you. Catherine was saying my courses are excellent. Thank you for that, Catherine. Okay. Okay, somebody said they were interested in the training courses. Sure. I'll tell you what. I'll just put a link in the message box here to our website, or I can share it with Julia maybe, and people can reach the courses that way. If you're interested in Redcap as well, we've got a Redcap Africa Day coming up later this month, the 28th and 29th of September. It's going to be free and online on Zoom, so you know anybody who's interested is welcome to attend. Okay. Okay, does it allow raw coding and what language does it use? Okay, so Katonet, Redcap is built with PHP. It's on a MySQL backend. The interface is HTML and JavaScript. You can customize the software if you choose to. We generally don't, because you know it might clash with updates that come out from Vanderbilt. They update it like every few weeks. So instead of doing that, there's a well-defined external module framework where you can build plugins that follow a certain standard, and there's a sort of a managed way for dealing with custom functionality that that doesn't clash with the core source code. But people have built very cool integrations with other systems. So and there's also an API for Redcap. So that's usually the preferred method of integrating it with other systems. But there's, they don't stop you from modifying the source code. So if you have a copy on your own server, you can do with that what you like. They just, whatever modifications you make to the source code, Vanderbilt lays claim to that. It's their IP. So if you change the source code, they make claim to that. And usually they do that because they share it with the rest of the consortium. If you have a good idea, they might put that in. So that's sort of how the consortium operates, is we all contribute and share freely. So yeah, if you're interested, I see somebody did post the Project Redcap link. So that's the international consortium site. If you're interested in signing up for Redcap, please go there. I will share information for the training with you guys. And I saw Rose shared the link to the Redcap Africa Day. Thank you so much for that, Rose. So I think let me stop there for now and just give Rose and Catherine a turn. And maybe if we have more questions, we can do that after the presenters are finished. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much, Emma. That was absolutely fascinating and really useful to learn about. I do hope we discussed previously something about e-consent, and if Catherine and Rose don't speak to that, it would be great to hear a bit more about it from you. But maybe let's hand over to Catherine for now.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for inviting me. So Irma just asked me to quickly talk about how COVID-19 has changed my work and how I work, and specifically with Redcap. So firstly, obviously now I am working entirely from home. And just to say what I do, I am the Redcap administrator for the Computational Biology Division at UCT. So this is not UCT's main Redcap instance, but at CBio we run the H3 BioNet Consortium, and this is a bioinformatics network that spans African countries. And we also support the H3 Africa Research Consortium for clinical and genetic data collection. So as the Redcap administrator, one of the kind of basic things that has changed is now we are not on site if there is a problem with our Redcap instance servers. But thankfully we have a systems admin and he goes into the UCT site if there's a problem. We don't normally have server issues, but when load shedding kicks in, occasionally we do. And one of the things that we've noticed over this COVID-19 lockdown time is a huge ramp up in kind of system attacks. They haven't breached our servers, but with a lot of research going on with COVID-19, there have been a large increase in attempted attacks on our Redcap server and our H0 Bionet servers. So luckily I don't have to field those, but our system admin has been saying that that has been a big increase. Something else that I've been receiving is a number of requests from consortium members outside of South Africa asking to use our Redcap instance. So it's a little tricky, as Irma was saying, Redcap is free, and you get given the use of it for non-profit research purposes. And because we are a consortium that spans multiple countries, we have a number of H0 Bionet members in many different African countries. So what I have been receiving is a lot of requests from other H0 Bionet members in different countries who don't have access to Redcap, but want to make use of it for a lot of administrative purposes. Not so much their clinical data collection. We do support research projects in Africa with their clinical data collection, but the ones that are using it already have their own instance and they're fine. And actually there's been a decrease in request for assistance on the clinical data collection as a number of research studies have had to halt or pause during this COVID-19 pandemic. But there's been a definite increase in the use of Redcap for us for administrative purposes. With these requests from people outside of South Africa and outside of our UCT environment comes grappling with decisions about data privacy concerns and ethics. We're aware of PUPI requirements, and it's a little tricky to navigate without knowing what other countries' data privacy policies are, whether it's okay to enable people in different countries to collect, for example, personal data for training registrations on our server here at UCT, and to know how to navigate that. So it's definitely raised a heightened awareness of data privacy policies that are in place, and trying to balance the need for our consortium to collect and manage training registrations and administrative forms, but at the same time make sure that we're doing something that's following all the policies in different countries. The next thing is that online training. So obviously a lot of training has shifted to an online format. We were using Redcap for H0 Bionet's many training courses. So we normally just have a training registration survey. And then we also run surveys on our training participants to ask them how prepared they are for the course, or to measure effectiveness of training both before and after training. So those have continued, but with the shifting of courses to online training, there's been quite an upheaval there. And we were in the process of planning face-to-face training for H0 Africa data managers, and now are having to shift to planning kind of online lectures and online access to online resources for training. So just in terms of the projects that we normally do, most of our Redcap is used for administrative purposes. we have far less users than Irma has. I think we only have about 83 users. But we use it for a lot of coordination of H2Bionet activities. And so there's just, what I've noticed is an increase in requests from staff to use it, not just for kind of training surveys, but also they're now wanting to use it for kind of overall project management. So some examples of that are projects that are testing pipelines, and they want to record their findings. They don't want to do it in Excel anymore. They want to make it accessible to people in different countries. And so now they want to use Redcap as the repository for that information. And so a lot of projects are now needing to be the flow of data and the use of emailing and sending out surveys that then follow other ones to different members. It's becoming a lot more interesting to figure out how to kind of step people through different activities and capture all that information. And then with the COVID-19 has come the inevitable speed and pressure to produce COVID-19 data collection instruments. So one of my key roles is to develop clinical data collection standards for Africa. And so there has been a lot of pressure that's in addition to what I normally do to develop these standards for COVID-19 data collection. So luckily we were able to lean on standards that we had already developed, but the pressure is on to develop things really quickly, given the time constraints and concerns of the pandemic. So those are just some of the ways that COVID-19 has changed what I do. Just in terms of things that I'm missing, so what I'm missing is the face-to-face group planning sessions. We have so many more Zoom meetings that it is difficult sometimes to have the time to actually do the development in Redcap. And I miss being able to just step out the office and speak to somebody about the project that I'm working on. So often there's been a request for a survey or some kind of project to be developed in Redcap, and you can just step out the office and knock on the door and say, I'm thinking of doing it this way. Is this going to be fine with you? But now it's either a Slack message or a call to explain it face to face. So those have been some of the negatives about working from home and needing to connect when it comes to kind of project development. Yeah, so that's just what I wanted to share. Just checking if there's anything I've missed. I don't think so. Just check the questions. Okay, so Julia, you were asking about curiosity about the escalation and attacks. I think that because we have a number of researchers that are part of our consortium who are really on the front lines of COVID-19 research, that perhaps there has been an awareness that we may have data in our servers about this. We don't, but we have connections with the people who are doing the work. So I think that that's been a reason for escalation and attacks, particularly noticing where the attacks have been coming from. We also know that there have been an escalation in attacks on many supercomputer systems that are processing COVID-19 data internationally. So I just think that this may be one of the reasons. And so, yes, we, as Irma says, we do have good firewalls and we have a very vigilant sysadmin, which is great. And I think that's the cause. I think that's all the questions. If anyone has any other questions, you're welcome.
Thanks so much, Catherine. That was a really fantastic set of insights from, I think, a fairly unique perspective. And I really appreciate your sharing those with us. It's certainly given me some food for thought. And it is interesting to think about all the different ways that the current situation has shifted, in some ways subtly and some less so, how we approach the actual doing of research and thinking about and planning for data collection. So thank you very much for that. I think if anyone would like to add any more questions, please just feel free to keep working through the chat window. There's been a lovely conversation going on there. At this point, I think we'd love to hand over to Rose.
Hi everyone. So I'm not an administrator on Redcap, so I am purely an end user. So I am the research coordinator for the neonatal unit at Charlotte Makeke in Joburg. So our unit is called PRINCE, which is the Project to Improve Neonatal Care. So I've been working somewhat from home, but not exclusively from home. So I'm still going into the office a little bit, but I am going to just do a short presentation for you guys. Okay, is that working? Right, so the biggest change that we've had from a clinical perspective is, as Irma mentioned, we have been using surveys really, really extensively, but not just as surveys. So pre-COVID-19, we used surveys occasionally to collect some information, but now we're actually using them as a primary data collection tool, because it's impossible to register all of our interns and registrars and consultants on the Redcap and get them all trained on even the basics and organize accounts for everyone. So we still need to collect data from all around the hospital about our COVID pediatric and neonatal patients, but we've chosen to set up our database and just activate it as a survey, as a primary collection tool. So people can just, it's a public link that they can access, and they can submit data on all of the patients that they are seeing. And normally it's done at discharge, but it has been done sort of in between and all the rest of it. So that is our biggest change, that we're using surveys instead of setting up user accounts and getting them to enter data onto Redcap. They're actually entering the data through a survey. So the second big change that COVID has had for us is just the number of updates. So I don't know if any of you are aware, and if you read Lit COVID or anything like that, but there have been more than 50,000 publications to date. That's roughly around 2,000 each week. So all the time there are new symptoms and new disease progressions and new terms and definitions and new tests required. So every time the literature changes, and the clinical platform actually has to adapt to that. So our primary neonatal database has already undergone 16 revisions. So that's roughly every week that we're actually having to go in and add new fields and update definitions and collect different data. So, you know, as the pandemic and the disease progresses, so does our knowledge, and the data collection has to match that. And that has been quite interesting and something that we've never really had beforehand. So the next thing is data quality issues. So our unit routinely collects clinical information on every neonate admitted to any of our wards. And normally we can keep those files for a week or two and go back and check if we need to. And we have paper records that we can verify against. But with the COVID patients, there's no opportunity to verify or re-enter data. So you have to do spot checks and on-site cleaning and do it as you go along. You have to make sure that everything is correct, which is quite different from our normal process where, you know, we have the opportunity to go back and fix once we've sort of run some data quality rules. But now we don't have the capacity to do that. And that is mostly because of the reporting structure differences. So what Charlotte has decided to do is they're actually collecting all of the patient files 4 COVID positive patients in the central administration building. So normally those would come down to our research unit and we'd have them for a couple of weeks before we send them on to records. But now we're not actually seeing those files at all. So we either have to go to central administration and go and dig through the files there, and it's literally digging, or we can do it at patient discharge using the surveys. So it's quite different to our normal thing, and there's no way for us to really go back and check. And we are very fortunate that we have let's call him a champion. He's one of our consultants who's really taken on the COVID database, and he spends a lot of his free time in the central administration building, sort of digging through files and finding ones that weren't captured at discharge. So the other thing that has happened is nothing is normal, because our usual routines of data collection, it's normally on a Thursday afternoon. All of our interns and registrars and medical officers all get together as a group, and they have this group discharge summary session, and there are consultants there that they can ask questions to. And because of obviously COVID restrictions, this hasn't happened. So we have a huge backlog of files that are non-COVID files to be collected and data that hasn't been verified. So that's the biggest change to our normal regimes that has happened. The other thing I wanted to talk about, and I think Catherine mentioned it sort of briefly, about there being, you need data collection tools and protocols that are standard, and we've come across that a lot in our unit. So I tried to get a national neonatal database for COVID patients going, and it didn't quite work. And I then tried a Gauteng one, and it didn't quite work. So everybody has their own database and their own data that they collect, and they're all vastly different. The Gauteng Department of Health collects some information, and the NICD collects completely different information. And then we collect clinical information that's more geared towards pediatric patients. So what you've seen is that there are literally hundreds of different databases that are they've got some things in common, and they're all COVID patients, but none of them are the same. So it's really, really difficult to marry all of that data at the end, and it makes our ultimate trend analysis and the risk factor identification really, really difficult for us. So those are the biggest changes that we've seen. So I'm going to stop sharing and see if anybody has any questions. Data standardization. Yes, it's a huge, huge issue. So we made our database and our survey available to all of the WITS affiliated academic institutions and all the neonatal units, so Barra and Rahima Musa, and I also made it available to all of the people in our cluster, but they were all quite resistant to it, and they all wanted to collect their own data. And I think the biggest issue with that is about data ownership, that people feel like, okay, if they submit data to sort of this central kind of repository that is maintained by the neonatal unit at Charlotte, how do they get their data back, and what can we do with it? So that is, for me, I think that's the biggest challenge. In terms of the actual data that we collect, it's all very similar from neonates. It's quite different to adult patients, and again, very, very different to what Catherine would collect through H3A Bionet, which is more genetics oriented. But the data sharing and people's unwillingness to actually collaborate and not take ownership of the data is what I've seen as the biggest challenge for the standardization. Okay, I see Catherine wants to connect later, and I don't think there is any other questions. Does anybody have any other questions?
Can I just speak to the data standards?
Yes.
So we encounter the same problems when we're developing data standards. There's a lot of wariness and resistance to sharing data. but what we do is we develop the standards as Redcap XML files so that people can build on those XML files and collect the data at least in a standardized format. But they can still add their own studies information in, and it doesn't then require data to be shared. They can capture their own data, but what we want to encourage is that they're capturing it in a way that is standardized. So in that way, you kind of sidestep the issues of data sharing, data access, and just focus on getting them to collect it in a standardized way so that when they are ready to share, you don't have to do a whole lot of harmonization downstream.
So I did offer the data dictionary to anyone who wanted it, but nobody has yet taken me up on that offer, because all of the WITS affiliated institutions obviously have access to the same Redcap that I do. So it would be very easy if I, give them the data dictionary for them to recreate the project in exactly the same way. But they don't seem to have been interested in that. And I offered it to the guys at Grooteschier and Tygerberg as well. But there's a lot of resistance, and it's sort of internal politics, basically, that makes it difficult to get everybody to collect the same data. But I did offer them the XML files and the data dictionary to try and get everybody collecting the same kind of information. But there was not great uptake, even within our own units. So in the pediatrics department, there are 9 different subunits, of which neonates is 1, and only 5 of the units in pediatrics are currently submitting data to our pediatric database.
I hear you. I think that one of the problems is there's a lot of competitiveness for funding. And yeah, you're right, there is resistance.
I think if I may also comment on that, I think that's maybe one of the downsides to Redcap, because it's so flexible, that everybody really wants a slightly different variation on the same theme, and with Redcap they can have it. So in a way, that's sort of an unintended consequence of the power and the freedom that the system offers you. And that's why I'm also very interested and supportive of the work that Catherine is doing right now with creating this concept of standardized or a bank of questions that are standardized and mapped to a certain concept and certain ontology that can be shared with people, so that yes, they can build their own instruments, but they sort of select them from or even select the fields on an individual basis from a pre-built list that will make interoperability really, really easy down the line. So, and I know that that's actually something that that Paul Harris has also talked about, and it's something that I think they are looking at. But the drive behind Redcap has always been to empower the end user and to allow, them to really tailor their instruments in any way that they like. But I think we're realizing now that has caused sort of unforeseen consequences, in that, it's really difficult to make these different systems talk to each other. So I'm really keen to support that effort. And so we always try and promote and share these instruments, like the one that Catherine's built and the one that Rose has built. But yes, people have perhaps still a misunderstanding of what it means to share metadata and what it means to just use the same standards, because there is still, a lot of competition for resources, yes, and fear, I suppose, of data sharing in a safe way. So I think that's also part of where South Africa still needs to catch up, is with policies around, so much good can come from sharing in a responsible way, but we need those guidelines for how to share responsibly without endangering people's private information. And I think, doing that by sharing the metadata standards is one of the best ways to go about it.
Thanks so much for those reflections. This is such a personally fascinating topic for me. I really agree in terms of this being a major area where there's a lot of learning to be done. And I think I mean, many of the examples you've shared have been clinical, but I think it applies very much to social data more broadly as well. And it's really something that I'm keen to keep thinking about. And I think it's going to be a really important area in the social data collection space. Irma, could I ask you to speak very briefly to the e-consent, and then I think we can hand over to Tom.
Sure. So Julia, the e-consent is really just an extension of the normal survey functionality. I did show it, but I think I might have just gone over it too quickly and not pointed out where the differences lie. So if I may take 5 more minutes just quickly to talk about that.
That would be fabulous.
Sure. Let me just go ahead and share my screen. So we have these different instruments, and some of them are surveys. Oh, sorry, I'm looking at a different project now. I was troubleshooting while we were talking. That's what happens when you have 6,000 users. So this is our demo. So you have these different survey instruments, and they can all form part of the same record. And normally you would consume this information by either looking at reports, or by opening in individual records and looking at the information in there. How the e-consent framework is different is that you simply take a normal data collection sheet, and I'm going to show you the settings associated with that. You turn it into a survey, and then there's a little section down here at the bottom of the survey settings that that allows you to use the e-consent framework. And what the e-consent framework really is it saves a PDF snapshot of the response right after the person has completed it. Because theoretically, I could have somebody tick a box that says yes, no, and then after they've ticked it, I can make changes to this instrument, and I can change the language of the question to say, I, Julia, am willing to give Irma my kidney. And that's something that I could do theoretically. So the e-consent framework preserves a snapshot that's not alterable electronically of what you consented to, and that snapshot is stored in a little document archive inside of the system here in the file repository. So any forms that have been enabled as an e-consent framework and that have been filled in and signed by the participant will have the snapshot stored here. So even if I alter the questions after the fact, this PDF remains intact the way it was when I signed it. So that's something that we've been promoting, trying to promote awareness of in our setting, just because of things moving online, and the consenting process most likely in future will keep moving strongly to this type of platform, this remote consenting, where there's not an interviewer and a participant sitting next to each other, but it's offered in some sort of survey format. So yeah, just to let you know about it, yeah, it's something we're trying to promote. I hope that helps.
Yeah, that's really helpful. I'm curious whether you found that IRBs are generally happy with this.
Generally they are, but I must admit IRBs, at least in my experience, are a little behind the times when it comes to electronic data capture. So, we still have cases sometimes where somebody in an IRB would tell one of our participants that they should not collect people's name and surname in the electronic instrument, because they still think back to, having a paper file where you have literally one binder with people's identifiers and another binder with their clinical information, which is, of course, not applicable to electronic data collection instruments, because you have different ways of preserving people's privacy in something like Redcap. For example, when you design your instrument, you can mark certain fields like name and surname, you mark them as identifier fields. And then when you do, for example, data exports, you choose to remove your identifiers. So there are other, and to my mind, better ways of protecting information in electronic systems. And but our IRBs, I feel, again, there's a bit of a vacuum of policy here that have not kept up with technology. I don't know if that's also been your experience.
So far, we've been okay. I don't want to tempt fate, though.
Yeah, right.
I see Rose has her hand up, and then I think it'll be great to move over to Tom.
So I just want to say what we do generally with our data is we keep all of the identifiers on a separate instrument, and they are clearly labeled as identifiers. But in terms of user access, you can actually define user access per instrument. So what we do is I just don't give people who don't have sort of the rights to access the identifiers. I just list them as Irma's showing there as no access. So in that way, we can actually customize who can see any of the data, even live on the database without having to do the exports.
That's really useful. Great. Thank you so much to all three of you for those really valuable insights. And thanks to participants for all the questions. I'm going to ask Tom to take over now.
Hi, good morning, everybody. So I'm just going to get up my presentation. Okay. All right. So today I'll be speaking about increasing reach by enabling data-free participation in research. My name is Thomas Chapman, and I'm an operations analyst at Binu. Binu is a technology company that offers data-free solutions. Data-free can be seen as toll-free calling, but rather toll-free data. So Binu's technology is based around our reverse billing agreements with mobile networks in emerging countries. So if I take South Africa, for example, we have agreements with Vodacom, MTN, Cell C, and Telkom. And our agreements stipulate that we hand over certain IP addresses, which they then basically leave uncapped. They're zero rated. So any content and any traffic coming from our IP addresses, the telecommunication companies know to leave uncapped. So all traffic, or whoever's on one of our data-free IPs can browse content and will have none of their mobile data taken. An example that many of you would probably be familiar with is many of the banking apps have this facility. So Binu at the moment, instead of you having to go to each of the mobile networks and strike an agreement with them, with Binu, we are able to switch on in a matter of hours, and whether you're big or small, it doesn't matter. We'll be able to configure your website or your application to be data-free. So that's just a bit of a background to Binu, and that is the core technology, the reverse billing agreements. And I'll speak more about our platform and the value adds to that. And off of this core technology, we have a number of products and services that's built around this data-free aspect. Within the company, one of my roles is to oversee the research side of the business. So today I'll be speaking about data-free and through the lens of research, so specifically at adding value to research via data-free. Speaking about Moya, our data-free super app, and looking at research within Moya, and running research projects on this platform, as well as more qualitative side, and that being Veto. And this is our data-free video conferencing and webinar solution. Great, so data-free. As I explained earlier, data-free is toll-free data, mobile data. And when we look at it, the aspect of data-free, when an end user browses content or accesses a website or application, their mobile data is not consumed. Even if they don't have mobile data or airtime, they can still access that content. So, you know, what we've seen in many emerging markets, and specifically in South Africa, is a situation where there is a severe data cost barrier. And what I mean by that is the average wage of South Africans compared to the gigabyte of data, it's a big portion of the average wage gets spent on data. So many users can't consistently access the internet. The smartphone penetration in emerging markets is only growing. However, users can't consistently access the internet. And this is very limiting, both for the end user, but as well as for businesses and organizations alike who would like to provide content to these end users or to their members, staff, whoever it may be, and they are not able to access the internet consistently. And that is a very limiting situation around mobile data and the prices around that. So as I alluded to earlier, it's data-free through Binu is all done through our zero-rated IP addresses, which are done through reverse billing agreements with the mobile networks. So we have different products and services, but to give you a bit of background on our B2B side, we will switch you on effectively, make your content live, and then at the end of the month, we will aggregate your data usage across all the mobile networks. So by that I mean whether one of your end users is on Cell C or Telkom, through our IP addresses, they'll still be able to access your content data-free. And then at the end of the month, we will aggregate that data usage and then basically bill you for your customers or end users' data usage. We are currently available across all networks in South Africa and in Nigeria on MTN and Airtel, as well as in Uganda, Cameroon, and Zambia on MTN. And we are speaking to most mobile networks across Africa, and we will be providing solutions, hopefully not just in Africa, but as well as in other emerging markets across the world. So within our IP addresses, there's the datafree.co domain. So when we set up a solution for one of our customers, what will be seen on the URL would be, for example, instead of www.abc.co.za, it will be www.abc.datafree.co. And over the years that Binu's been operating in the space, they've built up the trust in the datafree.co domain. So many citizens and users who come across datafree.co within a URL, they know to trust it. They've seen that, oh, we can trust this. If we follow this link, it's not going to use our data. Because from the research that Binu has done, we have found that many users do not have trust in a lot of websites and applications, because they know that if they access it and there's a video or some sort of high heavy data content, they're going to be the ones that are going to be consuming it, and that is going to consume their data. So they're very conscious of that, and they don't like browsing on sites that are very data heavy. And the sad thing is, and a lot of developers don't take this into account because they don't face the data cost barrier. But what many developers do is they build these beautiful and glitzy websites with incredible functionality, but they forget about the end user. And when the end user goes on and explores the site, they actually may not be able to render the full site, or they might run out of data because it is data heavy. So not only is there trust in the datafree.co domain, but part of our technology and our platform is when we take websites and applications or a URL, and we configure that data free on our platform. An analogy I like to use is we take that website or application and we put it through a sieve, and it shakes out all the data heaviness and leaves the core functionality of that website. It still looks good and it still operates perfectly fine, but you'll be surprised how much added baggage is on websites if you have to strip away and look at the back end. It's incredible. The likes of Google and other languages, they add on all this ad tech and unnecessary content that actually many people don't know are there, including developers. And at the end of the day, the end users then use that. So then they're the ones who are having to pay for that. So we shake that all off, which makes it more cost effective for our customers, because they're going to be paying for the data bill of their end users at the end of the day. But also there's a great functionality. The page loads quicker as it's not as heavy. So our services and our platform, it's a win-win for both the end users and our customers. So an example that I'm sure you're all familiar with is before we went into lockdown, the SA government made available the COVID website that provided information around the coronavirus. So before the government kind of jumped around and made this data free, we saw it as an opportunity to be able to make data free to showcase our services. But as well as, this is a real ethical thing, we said, people need to be able to have information for such a pandemic at hand and not worry about data costs. So it was both an empowering thing from our side, but also a great way to showcase, datafree.co domain, as well as, what it means. And I've just got a few stats here. So we made the SA COVID website data free on the 13th of March. And for 1.5 months until the mobile networks were informed by the government to make it data free, we saw over 500,000 monthly active users, so people continuously going on and looking at the site, and over 5 million visits in total. And it's great to see that, that users were going back and being able to consume information around this important pandemic and understanding it. And we were able to provide that data free. And then the government saw the value in that data free, and then informed the mobile networks that they need to continue with making it data free. So that's kind of our core technology, and basically how most of our products and services, how all of our products and services kind of are built on. So data free and research. So specifically looking at quantitative research over here, what we can do is we can take a survey, a poll, or a questionnaire, and we can make that data free specifically, okay? So this could be any old survey or poll, and we can just put that through our platform and configure it data free, which we can then distribute to your end users. And then the participant filling it out will be able to fill it out in a data free experience. So basically one of the value props to this is, instead of having to hand over data to your participants and giving them data to fill out the survey or to participate in an interview or to read more on a research project, where they could take that data and then spend it on, let's say, Facebook or Instagram or YouTube, within our platform and our configuration, we're able to restrict it specifically to that URL. So when the user accesses that URL and fills out the survey, it won't use any of their data. And then at the end of it, if they click away, a warning sign will say you're leaving a data-free environment. So you have a lot of control. So if you're having a few budgets and you have to stick within data costs, then you're able to set limits to say, we only want it for this user journey. And then after that, it mustn't be data free. Or if you would like them to fill out the survey and then click away to a page where it provides more information about the survey and about the research, you can include that, and then they will be able to browse that content data free. And also within our platform, you also have reporting to inform you how much data usage you're using, as well as set data limits and alerts to keep you updated. But when it's surveys, polls, and questionnaires, they are very data light, less than a megabyte for surveys, generally under 50 questions. And with our pricing, that comes to less than 36 cents per a respondent. So when you're dealing with text-based content, it is very data light. And obviously, it's very useful when extending your reach for research, as many users, or all users, will be able to fill out the survey data free and be able to access that link. So just an example, we ran we configured a survey for Stellenbosch University data free, that it was a inter-university survey that was done in one of their departments, and they wanted it to be sent throughout South Africa through the various universities and through the similar departments. And previous surveys that they run, I believe it was a yearly survey, they got a lot of feedback saying users firstly would attempt to fill out the survey, and because it was quite a lengthy survey, they would fill it out, and then halfway through they would run out of data. And then, when they did have data, or they got data again, they weren't inclined to fill it out because it was a lengthy survey and they'd spend time. And secondly, users sometimes just didn't have data to actually access it, who wanted to participate. So we enabled a data free for Stellenbosch University, and they ran a very successful research campaign around this, and they increased participation significantly, and they got a lot of positive feedback, both on the participants themselves, but also from the universities around configuring the survey data free. So now on to Moya. So Moya is a data free super app. We used to compare it to WhatsApp because our core feature was messaging. So we used to say it's like WhatsApp, but data free. However, we now, and not many people will be familiar with WeChat, but we actually like to compare ourselves more to WeChat, as we offer a whole lot of other content that's data free. So as explained, we have a messaging, one part of the app is messaging, where you can individually message people, or you can be within group chats, and all of that's data free. So you don't need mobile data to access Moya. And we wanted to, building off of our core technology, we saw a need for a platform to be able to distribute content. And when we did research into it around South Africa, we found that the #1 app that users always missed when they ran out of data was messaging, as they were never connected. So on WhatsApp, if you run out of mobile data, you can't send text messages. So we saw that as an opportunity to build a platform with a big user base, and then be able to offer other services off of it. And as I described before, it's more like WeChat because we have a Discover page that offers a whole range of data-free content. So for example, we have news updates, sports updates. You can check the weather. We have educational content, places where you can search for jobs, information around health. And then within this Discover section, our customers who want to reach our user base can offer their services. So just on that Discover picture that's come up on your screen, you'll see Gumtrees on there and ShopRite specials, as well as there's a free courses site that's provided by the government, as well as funeral plans. So this is how we monetize the app, as users then can go and access these services data-free in a data-free environment, and these customers can reach our user base where beforehand they really struggle to consistently reach these users online, as many users in South Africa don't have consistent access to the internet. So another feature we have on Moya is our Amoya Api. So let's say you have a database within, and from the conversation previously, from the previous presentations in today's webinar, I heard about data sets and databases. If you wanted to check, if you had mobile numbers from your database and you wanted to check how many users of your database was on Moya, you could do an overlap analysis. And then having done that overlap analysis, and let's say 100,000 of your users of your million database is on Moya, you can then bulk message them and interact with them individually, but in a bulk manner. So you could send them survey links or follow-up messages or integrate a chatbot. So there's a lot of functionality around that, and it makes messaging and engaging with our users a lot more effective and efficient. So as I mentioned before, we like to kind of refer to Moya as a data-free super app. There's a lot of exciting things we have in the pipeline coming up, one of which I'll speak to you about now, but that being the Moya panel. So that's very interesting and very exciting around research, but also we're looking at integrating a Moya wallet as well as targeted ads, all with, when I mean targeting, all with being very data conscious and around our customers, our users' data, as we're very aware of what other social media platforms around the world have run into issues such as Facebook and Cambridge Analytica. So that's very much at the forefront of our development. Just a few stats on our user base. At the moment, we have 1.7 million daily active users and 3 million monthly active users, with over 7 million registrations, and we're growing around 30,000 new registrations a day. So now looking at research on Moya specifically, what you can do is you can place a research project in Discover. So where all the data-free content is, this can be a survey where you'll be able to reach our user base. At the moment, we don't have the ability to provide targeting. However, that is within the pipeline, and I'll speak about the Moya panel next, which will allow for more targeting. So if you were to target right now, what we've asked many of our customers or the organizations that we've had collaborations with is to add logic into their survey, so that when we place it into Moya and Discover, then you will be able to screen out certain participants if they don't meet the criteria. What you can do also is you can share project information via landing page or to a website, so users can be informed about the research that they will be conducting or participating in. As well as you can recruit our users to a certain research that you may be doing and wanting certain people for certain criteria. You can add a recruitment opt-in campaign within Moya Discover, and people then will be attracted to that and they can sign up if needed. So just to give you some examples of some of the surveys that we've run thus far without the targeting. So at the back end of last year, after the Springboks lifted the World Cup in Japan, when the team came back and were doing a tour around South Africa, the HSRC approached us and said we would like to run a sentiment survey and to get an understanding of South Africa's sentiment around winning the World Cup. This ran over the course of the weekend, and it was a very short survey, I believe less than 20 questions, pretty straightforward, and it amassed over 7,000 responses in a matter of 2 to 3 days. So if you just look forward into the lockdown period just after COVID, the University of Johannesburg, in collaboration with the HSRC, came and spoke to us and said they wanted to run a survey on our Moya Discover. The survey was a lot longer. It was about 10 minutes, took you 10 minutes to fill out. It was offered in many languages, South African languages. and it ran for close to 2 months. However, this amassed over 82,000 responses. So Moya is a very powerful platform to be able to gain research off. I like to describe it as having thousands of field agents out there, and being able to easily distribute a survey and receive responses quickly. Our users are very engaging. I might add that both the surveys that I've just mentioned were unincentivized. Moya users, they feel that and we've seen it through our feedback channels as well, they want to give their opinion. This is a data-free space. They're not concerned about running out of data. They can explore and really be engaging with the content. And when you put a survey on there, they want to give their information. And one of the questions a lot of the time with the customers our customers ask is, can we follow up? Would you give your phone number if we can do a follow-up study? And they provide their phone number. They want their voice to be heard. I feel a lot of these users, especially the lower end of the market, don't like to use this kind of class, but the low LSM, their voices haven't been heard this consistently. So it's a very powerful platform to be able to reach both the lower end of the market. But we're growing at 30,000 new registrations a day. So it's very much we're getting a more complete picture of South Africa in general. As I've just described, a very powerful distribution platform. So these are just some of the organizations that we've worked with thus far and to have used Moya to run surveys on. Cool. So the Moya panel. As I alluded to earlier, we currently don't have targeting within our platform. However, we are very much at the latter stages of integrating a software, panel management software into Moya that will allow for increased targeting and for you to be able to provide us with a criteria and for us to run that through the panel and then provide a sample, which you then can reach. And this will be all done in-app, which will provide an all-round data-free experience. So we will send the survey links via our messaging API, and so you know that the panelists will receive the survey link and will be able to then click on that link. It will render data-free, fill that out, and we will be able to have all the tracking around that and complete responses. So we will provide increased targeting, which is very much a need, and a lot of our customers have asked for that, as you can only do so much with the screening through logic. And then we'll be down the line when we integrate and develop our Moya wallet, the incentives will be done in app, which will provide further to this whole data-free experience. And then users can use their points or their Moya Pay to buy things in app, or draw that out of the app and then spend that elsewhere. So most of our user base is from South Africa. I'd say over 90%. However, we do have users in other countries around the world. Moya is available for download on Android devices around the world. However, it's only data-free in South Africa and on select networks across Africa. But we do have quite a big user base in Nigeria and Zimbabwe and Uganda, so we'll definitely be offering this panel in the countries that we do have a user base in. And then the Moya API, which kind of works nicely with our panel. If you were to run a survey and then have users opt in for increased kind of participation within the research, once you have all those users' numbers, you can then use our API to message them in bulk and be able to send them broadcast messages, but also other links, and this is a more effective and efficient way to engage with users rather than having to send them messages individually. So now on to Veto and more around the qualitative research. So Veto is a data-free video conferencing and webinar solution. So think Zoom, Google Meets, Microsoft Teams, but as a customer of ours, you'll be able to take on the data cost of the end user and be able to provide access to a video or just audio stream data-free. So that will allow you to engage with interviewees one-on-one or with focus groups or in a webinar with thousands of users and users who join on a mobile network, whether it's through hotspot or directly connected to Vodacom, Salsi, for example. They'll be able to have a video conference or a webinar in a data-free manner. And one of the features is our focus group feature. So this is more orientated to the research sector, that within our configuration, we can make a focus group scenario where certain of the participants, people who are running the focus group, monitoring it, moderating it, won't be seen on it. There'll be kind of a ghost viewer, and the participants won't see that they're watching, and then you can kind of inspect their behavior as usual focus groups would run. There's obviously also the recording feature, like we've seen here on Zoom, so you'll be able to use it for purposes of going over afterwards or transcription situation. And you can do this on a contract or ad hoc basis. So let's say if you're going to be running multiple video conferences or webinars, you can enter into contract, or you can do this, if you're just going to be doing it once or twice in a week or once a month, then we also have ad hoc packages. Some of the benefits of Veto, and as I'm sure you can kind of figure out, is especially during COVID, where there's been limited one-on-one interaction, you can then have these interviews or interactions via video conferencing. But however, a lot of the time, users don't have data to be able to obviously consistently access or even have Zoom or Google Meets accessible on the devices they have. So Veto can render in a browser. You don't have to download the app. And you can then just send a link, like you send a URL, a survey link, and they will be able to click on that link and then be able to render the video conference or webinar in their browser and then engage through that. When looking at currently how normal interviews would have worked one-on-one, you would normally have to, pay for the transport, possibly accommodation, board and lodging of the interviewee, but now through video conferencing, through Veto, all you'll be paying for is the data cost. And just an example to give you is Grow Great Social Enterprise, that are a contract customer of ours. They are a business that offer postnatal and antenatal classes to new mothers or soon to be mothers, and in very poor regions across South Africa. And because of COVID, they haven't been able to have those one-on-one meetings, which are one-on-one classes, which are very important and vital. And through Veto, they've been able to reach hundreds of moms through the Veto video conferencing tool, where they host groups of, I believe, under 15, and they have somebody who runs through and gives these classes. And these end users are in some of the most poor backgrounds, come from the most poor backgrounds and in the most poor areas, and if they have an internet connection, have been able to connect through Veto and be able to receive that information that is so vital. Thank you very much. That's my presentation. And yeah, now I'll answer any questions that people may have. Alternatively, you can contact me at thomas.chapman@buy.new. Thank you. So now I'm just going to look at the
Thanks so much, Tom. That was really helpful and interesting to learn about your platforms in a bit more detail. Ben was going to speak a little bit about his experiences as a user, but he's just needing to reboot his machine. So I think it would be good if we just do a little bit of Q&A first. And I
Okay.
do see that Irma's raised her hand, so maybe she'd like to speak.
Okay, great.
Sure. Thank you so much for that, Thomas. That's really, really amazing. And I think the you know, just the capacity to reach these very underserved communities certainly makes me very happy. I know a lot of our researchers have asked me this before, is because they want to conduct some sort of survey and find a way to carry the data cost. So I was wondering, you know, a little bit more into the technical side of it, maybe. If I may share my screen, I just want to show you something and see if. Sorry, that's my daughter. So can you see that?
Yes.
Okay, so when we create surveys in Redcap, it generates a URL for us. We can also create a sort of a custom survey link that has this base URL, and then we put something in there. And I was just wondering, would this lend itself to, you know, a particular research group maybe having a contract with you guys and making their particular survey data free?
Yeah, so, you know, the great thing is you can open an account with us, which you will then be able to, as I kind of alluded to in my presentation, we software as a service. So our platform, where the data-free configuration happens, we actually have training sessions to show people how to be able to make these. So I'm just going to use a survey, for example, data-free, and then you have the flexibility to make, you know, whatever. If it's one research project data-free, or if it's, you know, all of your research projects data-free, there's different ways to manipulate the URL depending on where you want to start within the path. So anything after the datafree.co will be data-free. So you can place that by mapping certain URLs through our gateway only to be able to set up those restrictions. So you have
I'm
that
thinking that will probably be the case because we're not in a position to make the entire platform free. We just, you know, we don't have that funding. So I'm thinking if there's an avenue where, you know, individual researchers can make only their survey on Redcap go through your gateways, that would certainly be very appealing. And my sort of follow-up question to that is, you know, if you think that is possible, I was wondering if you would maybe consider doing a small demo of this at the Redcap Africa Day, because I know this is a topic that's of a great interest to a lot of people using our system.
Yeah, no, for sure. Just if I could just touch on your previous question before I go into that, is so I should have kind of mentioned it and was on my list here to speak on. So what happens now with the mobile networks, if you were, you know, big enough and you wanted to go through the whole rigmarole of kind of getting your IPs made data free, you would go over there, but they would make your IP data free. Through our technology, we can do it right down to the URL. So you have that restriction. So you're able to just make one specific survey data free. Whereas through the mobile networks, they don't provide that. It's, you know, it's your website, your IP in its entirety. And I saw a question in the chat saying about the datafree.co domain and why the SA government website doesn't have that in it at the moment, because the mobile networks have made it data free on their specific IP. So our IPs are mapped through our datafree.co domains, which are our IPs. So that's kind of the difference there.
Right.
Awesome.
Thanks so much. Tom, do you just want to speak to a couple of other questions in the chat?
Yes, let me just scroll up, go through it. Okay, so how do users, this is to Anthea, how do users know how to choose a data-free version of the web page, such as example with the government's coronavirus website? Okay, yes, so basically, so within our, as I think I just possibly answered this, was, within our URL, it's datafree.co. Within the SA COVID website, at the moment, they don't have that because the mobile networks have zero rated it on the IP. So if it was coming through our platform and our configuration, you would always know because it would be in the datafree.co subdomain. And Julia has asked, is data free always visible in the URL? Yes and no. So you can actually, we have a service where you can change that. So you are able, if you would like to make a specific URL for your company, that's, for example, it could be hslc.free.co. You can manipulate that and change that. But yeah, that's an added service, and we've tried it with other customers. However, as I mentioned in my presentation, we've really built that trust in the datafree.co domain. So it actually is somewhat of an advantage to have that, as your end users will know. Well, many users are we definitely informing them of that. So from Bosiswe, may you please provide an example of the baggage that you made reference to that makes a website heavy on data? Would it be something like a video on the website that you would strip away? Yes and no. So yes, if you looking at a website and you just want the core information and a video is not part of that, you would take that away. But one thing that doesn't work through .datafree.co is paid ads, so Google ads and stuff like that. So what we do is we don't allow any of those Google ads, which could be full screen vertical ads or banner ads or any of that. So we restrict that. So that is actually a significant portion of the data heaviness of websites. So we restrict that because you're not actually going to get any, if you do sell ads via your website, you're not going to get any a monetary gain through that. So that kind of is a way of reducing the data heaviness and being able to make that a bit cheaper if you're providing the data-free website or application. So from Julia, to manage data collection within Moya. No, so anyone can install Moya on their phone and use it, yes. So that's both whether you want to kind of use it as an from a business perspective and from B2C, or whether you're having like group chats or anything like that. You can install it and then use our API. So anyone can install it and there's no organizational type subscription, unless it's around kind of the API side of things, or if you want to provide consistent information or services within the Moya Discover section, then you obviously would then go into a contract. Well, not necessarily a contract, but there would be terms with reaching our users on that.
Sorry to interrupt you. Just given time, I'm wondering if I could maybe ask you to comment on the remaining questions in the chat. I'd just like to ensure that Ben has a couple of minutes to speak to his experiences with using your platforms.
Okay, sure. So I'm just going to quickly go through these. So what kind of device is required for Veto? I can share a a link to the websites that the browsers that we support, but basically it's device agnostic, but certain versions of browsers aren't supported. It's very much the older browsers, but I can share that information.
Thanks, Tom. Could I ask you to just type the other responses in, and then we'll come back to Q&A if we have any time remaining. Thanks so much.
Okay, perfect.
That was really helpful.
Yes. Awesome.
Right. Thank you, Thomas. Julia's asked me to give a very brief sort of user perspective, as we did with the other presentations. One of the hats I wear is as the coordinator of the South African Social Attitude Survey. I gave a presentation about 2 months ago talking about the shutdown of our in-person interviewing. And that left us with a dilemma as institutionally about, the need for policy relevant social sciences data in the interim, and particularly to capture emerging experiences, preferences, behaviors amongst the adult public. So institutionally, we made a decision to actually make use of the Moya Messenger app as a platform to conduct non-probability online surveying in order to give us a sense of those tendencies. Sorry, just bear with me a sec. So we did it in 2 rounds of surveying. As Thomas said, ours ran over in 2 time periods, approximately a sort of month apiece, or with our 2 rounds of interviewing. The first one was during the sort of the harder phase of the lockdown, running from the 13th of April through to the 11th of May. During that period, we collected just over 12,300 complete responses, which we carved up into sort of weekday 3 phases based on approximately a week apiece. Then we actually resumed again during the sort of middle to later phases of lockdown level 3, and that's run up until sort of earlier in the week when we'd had about 9,500 responses in this second phase. So we did make fundamental use of the data-free platform. We have to be upfront and say this was obviously a convenient sample. It's non-probability respondents opt-in. There were clear benefits of the data-free element of what Thomas has outlined, and I think that is one is that you get reasonably better coverage amongst the poorer segments of society. So if we look at the characteristics of our sample, we actually have decent subsamples from, for instance, from informal settlements and amongst low-income users. So I think that's been one of the positive aspects. It doesn't overcome the problem of representativity. So there are issues about undercoverage and non-response that we've had to try and deal with. I think some of the questions that were posed to Thomas were around potential coverage gaps. We struggled in the survey to get older populations, so those 55 plus, we had to really, particularly not just 55 plus, but particularly sort of 70 plus, we get very small samples. So we had to actually adopt a sort of secondary targeted approach to try and top up those populations where we saw there were coverage gaps. And a slight urban tendency as well, which we've also had to do in terms of focus on trying to encourage uptake in more rural localities. In terms of what the data itself, we benchmarked the characteristics to Statistate's population estimates, particularly focusing on age, population group, and educational attainment. But we still, despite that, feel that we treat the data fundamentally as broadly indicative of the patterns evident amongst the adult population and how it's changed over time, but taking into account the usual caveats that would apply to a non-probability sample. And apart from the UJHSRC democracy survey, there was also other surveying that was done by our institution. There was the more health-focused content run by several colleagues of ours, as well as a youth-focused survey. So we've made real strategic use of this platform as best we can to provide the kind of data we're interested in. I think what we really were looking for is to test associations and not just changing patterns between hard and low levels of lockdown, but also testing associations. So looking at lockdown experiences and what bearing that had on institutional trust, looking at the psychosocial strain, the economic impacts, also looking at issues such as social trust and solidarity, and looking at the relationship between these elements and policy support, a range of policy options that we considered, as well as issues pertaining to future outlook. So we really have focused on trying to get a sense of what are those different patterns and associations that we can draw inferences on during this time. One of the aspects I'd just like to flag was the issue of pre-coded versus open-ended questions. And we made quite strategic use of that as well. The use of quite a few open-ended responses. Yes, it's a pain to obviously type it in on a small cell phone, but actually it added immense value to our survey and our analysis. It gave us more nuance a nuanced understanding of lockdown experiences. It allowed us to bring in some semblance of a Q-squared approach. It helped us think of factors and associations we might not have thought about. And by coding of open-ended responses and using these as independent variables in our analysis, it has allowed us to test certain associations that otherwise in a short questionnaire we wouldn't have been able to do. And importantly, it's allowed us really to provide a human feel to the cold numbers. I think in all the publications we've done off the survey, we've made sure that we've actually, alongside the key patterns and statistically significant patterns that we find, bring through some element of people's own experiences in their own words. And I think that's been critical. In terms of dissemination and the provoking of debate, that's also been a key emphasis. And we've put a lot of emphasis on a series of daily Maverick articles. So with the round one data, we had 12 published articles dealing with a range of aspects from policy support, class-based analysis, human rights sacrifice, issues about trust, through to round two, where we've had 7 articles so far, including the one with the image, which is in today's Daily Maverick, where we've looked at issues again, like before the ban was rescinded, we looked at, what had happened in terms of public support, had it wavered, who was showing support and not. Issues about behaviorally compliance with regulations, such as mask wearing, the thorny issue of schools policy decisions in the early part of our round two, which provoked a lot of debate, particularly with the findings coming from the Stellenbosch crowd. And again, looking at a more nuanced set of human rights sacrifice, understanding which rights South Africans are willing to forego in order to flatten the curve, as well as issues revisiting confidence, which is understanding the drivers of that. And lastly, one which will come out probably early next week is about social solidarity and how fundamentally we've seen a switch from a more positive view on solidarity within society in the context of the pandemic to one that's been fundamentally much more critical, and one which is worry about generating further divisions within the country. Apart from this, which has really been used to stimulate quite a lot of discussion, we've also had a range of policy engagements. A lot of the findings have been channeled up to the National Command Centre. There have been webinars to really try and sort of broaden the spread of the message, but also critically interrogate methodology, such as the series here, but also talk about linking up and using different surveys that have been conducted within this period as robust, to test the validity and robustness of findings, to see if, whether it's NIDS, CRAM or Ask Africa or others, just to see if we're finding consistent patterns of results. And also, but that's more a concern that's coming through now, is obviously trying to take it forward to do even deeper analysis and push for academic publications. All this has been done partly with sort of getting beyond the great disruption in mind. So in the early part of the lockdown, the HSRC put an advisory out about, and sort of by level 3, we're allowing certain clinical trials to resume, but they're quite strict regulations preventing other forms of so-called lesser essentials forms of research to proceed. We are now, as we're getting close to level 1, putting in a SASAS resubmission to the Research Ethics Committee with an outline of our research plan and the kind of safety protocols we're putting in measure, with a planned resumption in October, November-ish. The advisory, sorry, I shouldn't say that, but just one thing that we're thinking of is to take the Moya messenger patterns of association that we've found and test these in our representative surveying post, once we resume face-to-face interviewing, to see to what extent those findings are replicable and hold true. And also to, I think one aspect of the Moya messengers is provoked lines of thought and interesting avenues for potential further testing. So it's raised a lot of questions that we want to try and get some element of an answer to. So I think all in all, although there have been challenges, and obviously through this series and others, there have been quite robust discussions about non-probability surveying during the time. I think it's, but the Moya messenger has actually served critical need for us to generate social science data to test certain hypotheses and associations. Thank you. I'll leave it at that.
Fantastic. Thanks so much, Ben. That's really fascinating, both in terms of the use of the platform, which I think elaborates on some of Tom's responses, as well as some of the other questions we had in the chat, and also in terms of how you're thinking about the SASAS work more broadly. I think, given time, we're going to wrap up and leave it there, unless anyone has anything burning that they'd like to raise. I'm not seeing any hands, so I think we're good. I'd just really like to thank everyone for their active participation today. It's been so great to have something of a conversation going, which is always challenging with a virtual platform. And huge thanks also to all of our various presenters. It's really been very informative and quite broad and diverse. Ben and Tom have shared their email addresses on the chat, so please do also feel free to reach out to them directly to continue the conversation. So thanks again to everyone, and we'll look forward to seeing you again on the 8th of October. Bye.